afternoon. This briefing on domestic abuse is being presented to acknowledge Safeguarding Week, which is happening across West Yorkshire for the whole of this week. This presentation makes particular reference to COVID-19. My name is Karen Booth, Safeguarding Partnerships Officer for Safer Kirklees. My colleague is Claire Ewart, Community Cohesion Officer within the Communities Service. And between us, we're going to talk you through the following presentation.
So this briefing covers the increased risk around domestic abuse during the COVID-19 outbreak, definition and types of domestic abuse, who is affected by domestic abuse, coercive control and stalking, signs and symptoms, good practice, responding, signposting and support.
So what is the increased risk with COVID-19? Domestic abuse has always been a hidden crime that takes place behind closed doors and in private family homes. Whilst the nation is being instructed to comply with social distancing and self-isolation, it is important to recognise that these understandable measures may mean that the risk of harm, both in frequency and severity, for those experiencing or are at risk of experiencing domestic abuse may actually increase. Self-isolation, more home working and additional childcare responsibilities have the potential to make those at risk more invisible, with less chance to seek help or disclose if abuse is happening to them. Home for these individuals and families is not a place of safety, but a place where they will feel a potential increase in violence and psychological abuse, as well as even greater isolation. Most children will not be attending school, so there is less opportunity for staff and partners to pick up on issues. The mental health of both victims and perpetrators could be significantly and adversely affected. Lack of social and sporting events may increase frustrations within the home. Worries about finance and day-to-day living are likely to become more evident, which could increase risk. Increased issues over child contact and critical services such as the NHS, police and social care will continue to be pressurised over the coming weeks and months. So what can I do? Complete this briefing so that you are familiar with the types of domestic abuse and know how to signpost or refer someone into specialist support services. Keep communication channels open with vulnerable people and households. Speak remotely to your friend, neighbours, colleagues, staff and teams so that we can be the eyes and ears within our communities, even more so during this period. The Home Office, as of 2013, defines domestic abuse as any incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive or threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between those aged 16 or over who are or have been intimate partners or family members, regardless of gender or sexuality. So what does this mean in reality? Here are some of the types of domestic abuse. So coercive and controlling behaviour. Controlling behaviour can be described as a range of acts which make a person subordinate or dependent by isolating them from support, exploiting them for personal gain, depriving them of independence, resistance and escape, and regulating everyday behaviour. Coercive behaviour can be acts of assault, threats, humiliation and intimidation, or other abuse used to harm, punish, or frighten the victim. Psychological and emotional abuse. This can include shouting or yelling, name-calling, blaming and shaming, isolation, intimidation, threats of violence, either to the person and or to their family members or pets, smashing things, constantly checking up on the person, making all the decisions, not letting the victim have access to the car, or the perpetrator purposely driving recklessly to scare the victim, controlling who the person is allowed to see and making them account for the time when not together with the perpetrator. This can also include post-separation abuse and behaviours that would constitute stalking and or harassment. So making unwelcome contact by phone, text, letter, email, through relatives, friends, or waiting for the person outside their home, workplace, child's school without agreement. Checking up or monitoring the person's movements, for example through social media, and or using the children to gain information. Physical abuse, pushing, hair pulling, punching, slapping, biting, kicking, burning, scratching, bruising, broken bones, use of weapons to cause injury, and in extreme cases can result in death. Strangulation and choking is the most common cause of death. Sexual abuse, disclosure of rape, pressuring, forcing someone to have sex, unwanted use of pornography, making the victim perform degrading sexual acts, criticising performance, taking sexual videos or photos without consent, later threatening to show them to other people, sulking or punishing someone for not having sex. Economic abuse, rigidly controlling a victim's access to resources, for example, withholding money or credit cards, making the victim account for every penny they spend, restricting the victim to an allowance, stealing from the victim or taking their money, forcing someone to work against their will, or not allowing someone to go to work. Honour-based abuse. So-called honour-based violence, where people are punished for undermining a code of behaviour in their family community, as well as FGM and forced marriage. A working definition is a crime or incident which has or may have been committed to protect or defend the honour of the family and or community. Female genital mutilation, or FGM, according to the World Health Organization, comprises of all procedures involving partial or total removal of the external female genitalia or other injury to the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. Forced marriage. According to HM Government's Forced Marriage Unit, where one or both people do not, or in cases of people with learning disabilities cannot, consent to the marriage and pressure or abuse is used. An arranged marriage is not the same as a forced marriage. An arranged marriage, the families will take a leading role in choosing the marriage partner, but both parties are free to choose whether to enter into the marriage or not.
So who is at risk? Domestic abuse can affect anyone, although women are disproportionately affected, and research suggests that they are more likely to suffer more serious injury and ongoing assaults than men. Other more hidden victims include heterosexual males in relationships, and they are often reluctant to report abuse by women because they feel embarrassed or they fear they will not be believed. They can also face barriers in accessing support. Older women and men are less likely to report their experience of domestic abuse. This may make them more invisible. They may also be more socially isolated, meaning there are fewer opportunities to seek help. Those with disabilities are more likely to experience domestic abuse and sexual violence than non-disabled people. As with older people, this means domestic abuse can be harder to spot, and they may find it challenging to explain what is happening to them if they have communication, sensory and/or physical disability. Ethnic minority women and men can face additional barriers to accessing support. Their experiences may be compounded by discrimination. They may be unwilling to seek help from statutory agencies because they fear racial prejudice in regards to their culture or religion. In addition to this, some people might find it more difficult to leave an abusive relationship because they feel or have been told it can bring shame on the victim and their family. They may feel they are betraying their community and fear repercussions if they tell someone about the abuse. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual women and men can be vulnerable to abusers who threaten to out them to colleagues, employees, and family members. Transgender women and men have fewer services available to them and may fear discrimination or not being believed by mainstream services. Pregnancy is often a trigger for domestic abuse, and existing abuse may get worse during pregnancy or after giving birth. Teen violence and abuse against parents, and this is a serious and hidden form of domestic abuse that is often not spoken about. It can take the form of any behaviour used by an adolescent in the family to control, dominate, threaten, or coerce a parent or sibling. The pattern of behaviour creates an environment where a parent lives in fear of their child and often curtails their own behaviour in order to avoid conflict.
So children. Domestic abuse can impact on children immensely. Statistics show that 62% of children exposed to domestic abuse were directly harmed, either physically, emotionally, or by being neglected. 52% had behaviour problems, 39% had difficulties at school, 60% felt that they were to blame, and 25% exhibited abusive behaviour towards victim and siblings. Living in a home where domestic abuse happens can have a serious impact on a child or young person's mental and physical well-being, as well as their behaviour, and this can last into adulthood. When we talk about the impact of domestic abuse on children, we mean the effect that living in a household where one adult is being abusive and possibly violent to another adult would have on a child. We do not generally mean the direct abuse of a child, but more the impact of exposure to abuse, violence, and coercive and controlling behaviours, and this should not be underestimated. However, the two can overlap. Children can also be directly affected by a parent's or a parent's partner's controlling and coercive treatment of another parent. For example, a perpetrator of domestic abuse might, in their abuse of another adult, prevent a child from visiting their grandparents, or going over to a friend's house for a sleepover, or even participating in extracurricular activities. There can also be major overlap between domestic abuse and the direct harm of children, for example, through neglect or physical or emotional abuse. Coercive control. What does this look like? This can be isolating a parent from their friends and family, controlling what they do, where they go, who they can see, what they wear and when they sleep, repeatedly putting them down, such as telling them they are worthless, enforcing rules and activity which humiliate, degrade or dehumanise the victim, financial or economic abuse, and threats to reveal or publish private information, controlling social media. Coercive control is commonly referred to as controlling behaviour and is part of the psychological violence that is almost always present in relationships where domestic abuse is a feature. This behaviour serves the perpetrator's needs in that they can often control the victim's movements, friendships, contact with family, parenting, finances, and many other areas of their life. It can make perpetrators feel very powerful or it can help them avoid feelings of insecurity, vulnerability, inadequacy, fear of losing the victim, and is usually a pattern repeated in all their relationships. Alongside other psychological abuse, the impact of coercive control on victims can result in intense anxiety, depression, isolation, a lack of perspective, reality, distorted perception of acceptable behaviour, fear, low confidence and self-esteem, and a wide range of physical and mental health problems. Stalking. This can include a pattern of fixated and obsessive behaviour, which is repeated, persistent and intrusive. It can cause fear of violence and/or causes alarm and distress to the victim. Sending gifts, making unwanted or malicious communication, damaging property, physical and sexual assault. Stalking and coercive control are often correlated and can be a high-risk indicator of harm. Signs and symptoms. A person suffering from domestic abuse could have injuries which are either hidden or visible, but often make excuses as to how they sustained those injuries. Low self-esteem and personality changes, fear of conflict, self-blame, isolation and control, stress-related problems, property damage, appointments which may be missed, frequently rescheduled, and the partner accompanies and often speaks for the victim. Mental distress, and the partner's behaviour can be aggressive, overly dominant, and doesn't let the partner speak for themselves. So good practice then, if you are working with somebody who you assume is a victim of domestic abuse, or indeed you've got a friend, family member, don't be scared to ask questions and be curious if it is safe to do so, and that is highlighted. You've got to think about your safety and that of the victim. It's important because it can show the person you care and want to support them. The person you're talking to may not appear to be a typical victim. It allows opportunity for disclosure. It helps to build up a bigger picture of what's happening so that you can think about risk, their sense of danger, and how safe they feel.
However, you must consider that the perpetrator may be in the same room or able to overhear, and/or the children might be present. Always ask, is it okay for you to talk?
So if the response is no, accept this and tell the person that you'll ring them back or that they can ring you when it's more convenient for them. Record that it's happened and follow up with your line manager and/or any specialist support services if needed. If the response is yes, the following slide will give you some useful prompts and questions, but remain mindful that the person may quickly hang up because it's no longer safe for them to remain on the call, or they may sound different if the situation changes. If you suspect that the perpetrator is in the room, it can be safer to ask questions or end the call by only asking questions that require a yes/no answer.
Some questions you might be able to ask, and again, choose which questions feel right at the time. Does your partner ever frighten you? Do you spend a lot of time trying to keep your partner happy? What happens when your partner is angry? Has someone else ever frightened or hurt you or your children? Do you ever have sex with your partner even if you don't feel like it? Has anyone ever hurt you, and who? Does your partner make it difficult for you to come to attend work or other appointments? How do you cope with your partner's anger? Where do you go when you are frightened? And is there anyone you can talk to when you are frightened or upset?
So, if you need to provide an emergency response for somebody suffering from domestic abuse, West Yorkshire Police on 999 would be the number to call if somebody's life was in danger or there was immediate threat to them. Obviously 101 would be for anything else. Any concerns about a child would need to be referred through to Children's Services, and it would be duty and advice, and that's their number there. If you have concerns for a vulnerable adult, then you would need to get in touch with Kirklees Gateway to Care. And again, that's the number for them. If you were with somebody and they were making a disclosure, it would be important to encourage a conversation to take place in a safe place for them and for you. Try to make an early assessment of risk, thinking about the type of abuse that's been disclosed. Are there any children involved? How fearful does the victim appear to be? And how severe and frequent is the abuse? If it's an emergency, then you would be best placed to contact 999 or encouraged to report on 101. If you have a concern or a gut feeling about somebody, if your service that you work for has access to the West Yorkshire Police Partnership Intelligence Portal, then you can always submit intelligence through that. You might want to signpost a victim to specialist support services, phone the police on 101 or encourage the victim to do so themselves, or look to get advice and guidance from local and national advice lines. And here are a number of support services available to victims of domestic abuse. The Pennine Domestic Abuse Partnership is the one widely known in Kirklees, and that number there is for their 24-hour helpline. The Women's Centre, again, Kirklees and Calderdale based, there's their number there. And then the other contacts on this list are all national helplines or websites where you could signpost somebody to, or even look yourself to see what kind of advice is available for a victim of domestic abuse. And here's just another one, that's for Carmen Ivana, again, a 24-hour helpline. Here's the Kirklees website where you can go to for advice, help and support around coronavirus specifically. Thank you for listening. I hope you found that briefing useful. It is just a basic awareness of domestic abuse. There is other training on offer which goes more widely into domestic abuse if it is needed in your job role. But there are our contact details and email addresses. So if you, after you've listened to this presentation, you feel like you'd like some more information or you've got any questions, please just get in touch with one of us or both of us and we will both respond to your query. Thank you.
Thank you.